For the most part, Creative Assembly is known for their real-time strategy games, specifically the Total War series. Similar to how Guerrilla Games moved away from the Killzone IP to produce Horizon Zero Dawn, Alien Isolation may be recognised as Creative Assembly's departure from the Total War franchise. While Alien Isolation made the series faithful to the source material as much as possible, compared to Gearbox Software's attempt with Alien's Colonial Marines, it wasn't the first game where they moved away from an RTS background. In 2005, they released Spartan Total Warrior, a hack and slash game for the PS2, Xbox and the Nintendo GameCube. It was a fairly successful game, but what do I think of it? Set in 300 BC, the majority of Greece has been conquered by the Roman Empire, and Sparta is the only state remaining. You play as the unnamed Spartan, who he and his allies must go on a quest in order to save both their city and Greece from Roman tyranny. Aside from producing their RTS games, Creative Assembly is known for making them as historically accurate as possible. Spartan Total Warrior doesn't follow this trend because in this universe the Romans are more industrialised, with magic and advanced weapons have become entwined. While both factions were formidable in their own right, in reality it's obvious the game isn't going for realism, especially when there are enemies that possess modern flamethrowers, which weren't utilised until the First World War for clearing out trenches. As I mentioned earlier, Spartan Total Warrior is a hack and slash game. Romans are the main opposition, but throughout your journey you'll face barbarians, undead and other adversaries that may halt your progress. The controls are basic with X to attack, circle to perform a charge attack and L2 for blocking incoming damage. Furthermore, as you attack enemies your rage meter fills up for an execution, either against a single target or against multiple foes at once. The problem is, the latter option is so effective to the point its alternative is made redundant, and you have to recharge the ability after each use. Luckily, the recharge rate is fast enough to alleviate this somewhat, and the weapons you'll find do influence how quickly the meter recharges, but they also have their own damage and speed properties. That's not to say Spartan Total Warrior is an RPG, so if you're expecting that experience, you won't be getting it here. However, after each level players are rewarded with tokens which can increase their health, magic and damage. Although the upgrades for your health and magic are visually noticeable, they only provide a false sense of security, and as far as your damage output, I didn't notice a significant difference until the latter stages. Enemies are capable of doing serious harm, and since you'll likely be outnumbered and surrounded, this can be frustrating on the hard difficulty, where they're more dangerous in terms of their efficiency. It might seem playing on hard is for those who want the extra challenge, but when you factor in the need to manage multiple objectives in addition of your avatar's survivability, those magic and health shrines which are placed far away from the battle don't fully compensate for your amplified abilities, and of course there's so many on each stage. Going back to combat, your shield can push back either one individual or repel groups of enemies to give you time, but since most scenarios you're going to be surrounded, the latter is far superior in terms of effectiveness. There was one level where I was overwhelmed by undead infantry while being shot by archers, and all I did was keep my guard up to reach my objective, knowing I wouldn't take any hits. The only time this technique didn't work was against those who could stagger you, whether that's large NPCs or during boss encounters. Speaking of bosses, they weren't designed to the best degree, with engagements becoming so frustrating to the point there were several balancing issues. For example, the first boss, Crassus, was able to turn me into stone for a cheap hit as long as he had magic, meaning I couldn't attack him directly and he had the tendency to run away to regain his strength. While this isn't the case for all boss fights, I wish they were balanced properly, and it is only exacerbated on hard difficulty due to the increase in hit points. Fortunately, in specific circumstances you're accompanied with your fellow Spartans, but when it comes to fulfilling objectives, it's you doing the heavy lifting. Aside from your melee weapons, the Spartan has access to a bow, which can shoot regular or flame projectiles despite ammunition being limited. In my opinion, the bow is probably the most balanced because there are scenarios where shooting multiple projectiles isn't the right call, and it's not because of conserving ammunition. Fire arrows, despite being a damage buffer, are primarily used for specific circumstances, plus they only stay ignited for a short time compared to the regular projectiles. That being said, Spartan Total Warrior doesn't incentivise a second playthrough, which is ironic as missions are replayable once completed, and there's an arena mode where yourself and your allies, assuming you've gathered the collectibles to unlock them, can face off each faction depending on the map through a series of waves. Sadly, all of those upgrades from the main story don't fully apply, which is annoying because it would have helped the game's longevity. If that wasn't enough, you can't replay the story with all the upgrades unlocked because there's no new game plus. With so much happening on screen, you think the game wouldn't be able to sustain its frame rate, but this isn't the case. Originally, the developers wanted to stick with their RTS roots by bringing Total War to the consoles. However, due to the PS2's technical limitations, which they were catering towards during development, they realised having thousands of soldiers in one place wasn't a feasible prospect. By scaling down the quantity, combined with its 750 meter draw distance and running at 60 frames per second, they're able to convert it into a hack and slash game. And I have to say, seeing hundreds of Romans in one place with no frame rate dips is impressive, not to mention their bodies litter the battlefield every time you kill one. I also applaud Creative Assembly for the different enemy types, not just in their appearance but also in their behaviour. Blocking may be effective in most situations, however some enemies can hit you so hard you're prone to a follow-up blow, and therefore dodging is far more reliable. Despite all the problems that inhibited my experience, there were moments that gave me a sense of satisfaction, even though I had my shield up for the most part. Unfortunately, it's not one of the prettiest titles you'll play as far as 6th gen games are concerned. Of course, judging any retro release from a modern perspective isn't a simple task, but in this case, Spartan Total Warrior does speak for itself, with characters lacking facial expressions even when the game requires it. As for the environments, they are alright, but there weren't situations that made me stop and admire them. Voice acting is okay, but the main protagonist sounds flat compared to the other characters, and I also found the story not only derivative, but its revelation in the climax has no build up for a satisfying conclusion. In short, Spartan Total Warrior is one of those games that left me conflicted. On one hand, the combat did provide some satisfying moments, and I am impressed at how it handles numerous NPCs without frame rate stuttering, but its derivative and predictable story, as well as its design issues, hold the game back. I might be in the minority because some of you may like Spartan Total Warrior, and all I can say is, more power to you. Plus, you can't satisfy everyone because we have our own expectations. After all, I didn't like Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice as much compared to the general consensus. Spartan Total Warrior isn't a bad game, but you might want to fight in the shade with this one.